All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever everyone's coming in from around the country, around the world. We have a fantastic panel to talk through data and how we can grow generosity. Love the keynote kicked off earlier this morning to get the ball rolling on day 3 of our Responsive Nonprofit Summit. I'm Eric Tamales, Chief Evangelist for Virtuous. I'm really excited to be here. Want to introduce our team, but before we do, I want to talk about what this session we're going to go through. So it's all about data. We're going to we are collecting more of it from more places. How do we make sense of it all? What data is going to be what data is going to help fundraisers drive that results, prioritize their portfolio, and understand trends that make you understand the donor or prospect. The panelists here are some of the best frontline fundraisers in the business. They're going to share their thoughts, answer our questions. It's going to be interactive. We're going to help our fundraisers use data to help grow generosity. And honestly, making an ask is both a science and an art. So let's have this conversation and see how we can help out our major donors and our frontline fundraisers. And with that, I'd love to introduce our panel. And Greta, it looks like you're off mute. So I'd love to see if you can just introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are and where you're coming in from.
Hey everyone, my name is Greta Daniels. I am coming in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Here, those of us who live in the Steel City. I am right now a fundraising consultant for Buffalo No 11s, and I've been with the company for just shy of 4 years. But I've spent about 20 years of my career in both higher education, healthcare, and nonprofit fundraising. I've been in every role there is, whether it's annual giving, major giving, event planning, total, jack of all trades, master of none, and certainly other duties as assigned, which I feel like is something that we are all very familiar with in the field. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me, Eric.
Love it. Jesse?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessie Marsh, also coming to you today from glorious Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we are, in fact, having
here.
blue sky today, which is really exciting this time of year. I am the Vice President of Advancement for Boys and Girls Clubs of Western Pennsylvania. Been in the role for going on 2 years. Have spent 23 years as a fundraiser and nonprofit professional, both as a consultant as well as in-house within nonprofits. So glad to be here with everybody today.
Thanks so much, Jesse. And then last but not least, how about you, Dan?
Excellent. Well, Daniel Sullivan here. I'm the Director of Philanthropy for the Parkland Health Foundation here in Dallas, Texas. While I'm not in Pittsburgh, I have lived there, so I feel like I can kind of count that amongst this group. But I've spent about 17 years in social service and now healthcare philanthropy, similar to everybody else in a variety of roles, from annual giving to events to serving as Chief Development Officer. And so I'm really privileged to work for Parkland here in Dallas as we advance healthcare equity and access for the residents of Dallas County.
It's fantastic. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Yins. I'm also from Pittsburgh. If you haven't caught the movement, if you don't know, I'm also a recovering fundraiser and now on the tech side with Virtuous. I've spent the last 20 years on the front lines. I've made over 4,000 face-to-face visits working for the Boy Scouts, St. Jude, the health system, a lot of other organizations. And what you see with the group we have around here is, Greta with her background with higher ed and where she's at on the Buffalo Knoll, as well as Dan and Jesse coming from the field. I think it's just a great complementary piece of how we focused in on data and moving forward in that conversation. So with that, I'd love to open up to maybe Greta or Jesse and just, what did you wish you knew when you were beginning in fundraising regarding data?
I can start. One thing that I think about all the time is, when you're at those conferences and you're walking through the expo, and when you start, you're hiding from all of the people because you're like, everyone wants to talk to me and tell me something and send me 100 emails. I had to get over that because what I came to discover as I became a more seasoned fundraiser is, these people actually know what they're talking about and they can teach me something. So some of my best friends and favorite industry colleagues have come out of those walking past the booth moments, have become, decades long friends, and the people that I call when I go, I don't know what to do about this. So some of the greatest minds in fundraising are at those expos now. So I say, don't be afraid to talk to those people. They are going to send you some emails, but you also might make a really valuable friend and a knowledgeable friend.
Absolutely. I think for me, something that I wish I had known earlier in my career is how valuable looking at like retail and consumer metrics is from a fundraising perspective. When you're thinking, especially when you're thinking about broad base, like annual giving, kind of mass communication. I think when I first started as a fundraiser 20 years ago, sales was a dirty word, and we didn't talk about that when it came to fundraising. But now I look at things like the S&P and the Consumer Confidence Index and for profit consumer retail metrics all the time because they're really good indicators for me in my fundraising work. If the S&P is not performing well, I know how my major donors are going to be feeling about their liquidity and their ability to make larger contributions. If inflation is at astronomical historic highs, and consumer confidence is low, that's going to impact my broad base too.
Mhm.
So I think it's really like those were really helpful things to learn later on. Whereas if I had just had that kind of information at my fingertips earlier, I could have planned better. So I think that was something that I definitely encourage everyone to embrace.
I love that. I love that. I mean, talk to me. I mean, Dan, I mean, I know you guys are at Parkland. I mean, like, what are you utilizing as technology to help you with the future of fundraising within your institution or even
Yeah, definitely. I think, for so long, I think, fundraising has been a blend of the art and the science. And you mentioned it earlier in your opening comments. And I think that the science is making a really, really strong push to be kind of the preeminent piece that we focus on. And so here at Parkland Health, I mean, really everything that we do is based on data. So everything from where we raise money for, and so making sure that we're addressing the socioeconomic inequities within Dallas County and that we're delivering healthcare to those communities, that's driven by data. Where we look at our fundraising priorities and who we're going after and targeting for solicitation, that's driven by data. And some of the technologies that we use, obviously, very reliant on our CRM, but starting to dip our toes into the AI space, which is really exciting. Looking at a lot of our screening tools and how we use AI to complement that and really prepare our gift officers to go out and make the solicitations necessary to raise the funds. I think then also looking at how we measure that success, both in terms of efficacy in our fundraising efforts. So, dollars raised, the actions that we're taking, the work product that's coming out of our office, but also the impact that philanthropy is having on our healthcare system. And tracking those through a variety of technologies that are tied to CRM, that are tied to our system, that are built specifically for us. And so, I think I know somebody, it's actually you, Eric, who used to say that strategy drives
data drives
strategy drives execution.
creative drives
And
results.
so, I think that fundraising as a whole has made this huge evolution to being much more data informed, not less reliant on the relationship, but not placing that ahead of making sure that we're making the right asks of the right people at the right time.
I'm gonna place that in the chat. And that's fantastic, Dan. And I think about it too, is like, I mean, gosh, 20 years ago when I started fundraising and coming from Pittsburgh, I went on the road to Houston to go visit with 10 or 15 donor prospects. I would send them an email. And in that email, I would start utilizing data to say, hey, who opened the email? If they opened an email, I could track that click rate and say, hey, maybe I should make the phone call to see if they want to visit with me because they actually took the time to open the email. And then there's 3 articles inside that email is like, scholarship, capital campaign, whatever you want to do. If they clicked on those articles, I knew when I was on doing the donor visit, I would talk about whatever they clicked on. And that's the personalization, that's the donor journey. But like today, oh my gosh, there's so much more out there. To Jesse, your point, walking through the exhibit hall, looking at all the new technologies and features and things that are out there today versus 20 years ago. Tell me a little bit about some of that behavioral side, the humanity side of the philanthropy. What's going on with like utilizing data how do you guys operate without making it creepy, right? Like there's so much at our fingertips, and how do we have that personalization, as I just kind of alluded to?
I think you mentioned the AI, which I think everyone is either dipping their toe in or is already fully embraced. I think there's other pieces to that behavioral element too, because I think one of the things that I think we're really starting to understand is how biased our data can actually be. And if we're not really conscientiously trying to read between the lines and find the data that's missing from your database, We're going to make decisions based on incomplete information. Oftentimes, a lot of the institutions that I work with as a consultant are making a lot of decisions based on the data that they have, which is based on previous gift behavior, previous engagement with the institution. But there's always this large population that has yet to be engaged. So we're making decisions where we're essentially preaching to the choir. We are engaging the same folks who have always been engaged, and we're neglecting to find a way to bring in new folks and bring in this kind of missing population. And some of it has to do with the fact that we are kind of in this repetitious cycle. So how do we use things like AI to learn more about our donors when they haven't volunteered that information? And then also, how are we effectively and actively seeking that information from them? Through market research, through those personal visits, through actual collection, to be more inclusive and figure out where those blind spots are, so that we can actually engage a broader base and in so doing advance our missions.
So great. Jesse, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how much responsibility we have when it comes to the data that we can see. The first time you look at a wealth screen, you're like, oh my goodness, we're allowed to know all of this, right? I've had conversations where going over something with a staff member, with a wealth screening, they noticed that they knew someone and there was a piece of information in there that probably was not something that person would have wanted their acquaintance to know. And so how do we handle that? How do we responsibly, protect donors' information? We're obviously not sharing that broadly, but even it's very easy to have a development staff person who has a relationship with a donor. And so I think we have to be really thoughtful, whether we're talking about AI and just the responsibility of technology and what it can do, or if it's about private, or information that most people would say maybe should be private, even if technically it is publicly available information. So I think that's got to be part of the conversation whenever we talk about data. Everyone's saying data is king. So how do we handle that responsibly as fundraisers when our whole work is to make the world better? Let's make sure we're being responsible in how we approach all of the technology and all of its capabilities.
I love it. The responsible AI, responsible data. I think about the security thing, and it's a great layup for Dan. Obviously, you guys are probably recognizing Dan's having internet jumping in and out, and it's probably because he's at a healthcare institution and they have major firewalls and security and PHI and all that information. How are you, Dan, working with your development team as well as looking at the data to make sure that they're ethically following responsibility and security?
Yeah, and thank you for the tee up there. I think data security for us, I think, any fundraising shop, any development organization, data security is key in making sure that we treat our donors with the utmost respect, and that includes safeguarding their data. For us, it becomes exponentially more difficult because a lot of our data that feeds our data strategy is patient information. And so, being extremely conscious and working in conjunction with our partners across the system in compliance and legal is key. And so I almost look at the relationships we have within the system as an extension of a donor relationship, because it's building that trust, building that relationship, and making sure that we're stewarding those relationships within the system so that there's a comfort level and a support level around our patient data, our donor data, and how we utilize that to raise funds. I think with all the advents in technology, I couldn't agree more. The first time I looked at a wealth screening, you feel like you're breaking the law. With all the advents in technology and the AI space, and just as things get more and more transparent, I think we have a responsibility to not only keep that information confidential, but to really be almost transparent to an extent with our donors of what we do collect and what we don't collect. And I think that making sure that we've got data partners that have that same philosophy has been really important for us.
So true. Go
ahead, to kind of go on that too, and healthcare is very specific, right? We've got certain data that is incredibly protected, and we need to be very conscientious about that too. But to play a little bit of devil's advocate and kind of how we use data and how data is expected to be used, I think we're entering a phase of kind of general human, kind of both retail, consumer, and nonprofit interaction, in which the expectation is that you know me. and that you're going to meet me where I am, and that you understand my history. And if I looked at that chair that I was thinking about getting for the porch, it's going to show up in my Instagram feed later in the day. Like this retailer is going to follow me until I eventually act on whatever it is that I was intending to do in the first place. And I think a lot of folks have come to rely a little bit on that kind of relationship with brands. And I think we as nonprofits are also brands, that are part of their general kind of awareness. So as much as we want to be both mindful of protected information and the data that we are housing, certainly from a housing perspective, I also think our donors are becoming more and more comfortable, if not, um, coming to rely on the fact that we know them and we should act like we do, and everything that comes, from us to them should reflect that.
That's a really interesting point, Greta. I think because, people who are sort of in that early adopter category that just tend to sort of get more comfortable with things more quickly, change doesn't scare them. And, they're not the doomsdayers. Right. They're the like, yeah, this is great. And it makes for greater convenience for me. I think you make a really good point. I think we are at least approaching a point where the majority of people, whether they're thinking of themselves as a consumer or a donor, does have an expectation. I mean, if I don't get the, Kate Spade text that there's a sale, I'm like, what's wrong, Kate Spade? What's happening? So it is, I know that for myself as a consumer, I'm nearing that point where it's less of an intrusion and it's less of a surprise. Remember how, 6 months ago, 2 years ago, we would say, oh my gosh, I was just having this conversation about going camping, and then there was a tent ad on my Facebook page. Yep. We're not surprised anymore. Yeah. It's like the conversation is just nearing that point where what you're saying, where we're turning that corner, and instead of being surprised and feeling like it's intrusive, it's like, where's the tent ad? I'm ready to buy a tent. Right. So that's a really great point about remembering that we, stay with the pack or ahead of the pack, and we're not still, just with the people who are feeling like it's intrusive and they're still surprised by it, because there are people, like you're saying, that are far ahead of that, and they've not only accepted it, but they've come to expect that from us, that we know them. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the days of the form letters and the generic approach to our donors are over, and I think that nonprofits who don't adopt that customized and utilizing technology to be able to do that, I think are going to get left behind. And so, to your point, I think you've got to embrace it, or you really are going to get left behind in the dust. And other nonprofits that are willing to use data to their advantage to customize approaches and create a frictionless experience at all levels are going to win out, and donors are going to be attracted to supporting organizations like that.
And I can share that we've got. Oh, sorry, Eric.
No, I was just going to say, if you just think through like what we're doing at like All Out There is like you're talking about Kate Spade, about having that connection through multi-channel communication, whatever it might be. But you don't want Kate Spade sending you a birthday message. They are. But like from a nonprofit point of view, if you're supporting, the Boy Scouts or Parkland or Pitt or whatever it might be, like you want the organization to reach out to you like Kate Spade is doing, right? In that personal manner. We want us to say happy birthday or happy anniversary or whatever it might be.
I mean, I think it's all about authenticity, right? It's all about, own who you are, right? Yep. And so if I'm Kate Spade and for your birthday, I'm going to send you a bag at 50% off, that's great. But if you're Parkland and I'm going to send you a celebratory note on the date of your first gift to us, right? Or, if you're the Boy Scouts, the day that you were earned Eagle Scout. Yes, I think there's a extreme balance of what's in your space and what's authentic to your brand versus what everybody else does, because then you start to lose out on the personalization and you just become one of the crowd.
Yeah, I see it. And I know there's questions or comments in the chat about kind of like when your board has hesitancy around this. You've got leadership that thinks that this is creepy. The good news is we've actually now got data that backs up that this is where your donor base is. The opt-out rates on text outreach and text solicitation are incredibly low. Yep. The expectation that you're going to be in all of the channels that everybody's already in is there. So I think, and like the supposition that it's only young people that are doing this is wrong. All of our data is pointing to our best text responses and text gifts come from people that are over 50. So, we've got this it's really interesting to see. And I think as long as you can back it up, but I think a lot of leaders, really need to embrace some of the new technology that is available to them, but also recognize, to your point earlier, Dan, that like you will get left behind, and it's an incredibly noisy marketplace from both a nonprofit perspective as well as just a general market that you have to be present in order to continue to be relevant.
Greta, I would love for you to kind of go deeper and wider on this, because Megan, hi Megan, nice to see you. I'm glad you're here. But she's following up on Clay's message, talking about the demographic and how that plays in part with data and the security and the board. Can you go through? I know you're an expert in this, Gen Zer. Talk through the generational giving a little bit.
Well, I think it's really well, this is what I feel like I can talk about this all day, every day. So I think about this a lot in terms of your donor pipeline as well. So right now in the United States, more than half of the living population is under the age of 40. So we've entered this phase of, your next campaign, your next major contributors are not who you think they're going to be. They are 40 years old. They're elder millennials, if you want to call them that. They are, making decent money, maybe starting families, maybe not, and really starting to think critically about how to manage their assets. So this is the group that's going to be really relevant for a lot of organizations that are keying up their next campaigns. With a lot of the institutions that I work with now, we're looking at major campaigns that they're launching, which are going to be 10-year, multi-billion-dollar campaigns, saying this is the group that's going to bring you to the finish line. So it's hypercritical that we are getting them engaged now. Whether or not they can make that $1 million commitment today, they're certainly going to be the ones that can do it 10 years from now. But they're very different. This is a group that has traditionally very low institutional trust, that is looking for transparency in how dollars are being used, and are also really keyed into kind of key issues like social justice, the environment and climate change, and other things that many institutions are working on, but aren't, and maybe even tangentially. But if it isn't like the core part of your message to them, you're not going to be resonating. So finding ways that we can speak to these different generational groups based on kind of these major shifts that we're seeing is going to be really important as you start to gear them up to be your next generation of major donors.
That's awesome.
That's it in a nutshell, Eric. I could talk about this for 10 years.
We're not going to solve.
There's so much on it. That's so much fun.
It's so good. It's so good, Greta. I love it. Jesse, you talk about the beyond, like in the booth, like the exhibit hall, going to conferences, learning from. What are you seeing out there? Like what trends, what technologies beyond the CRM, beyond the well screen? Like what else is out there that could help you drive generosity with Boys and Girls Club?
Sure. I mean, I think there's all kinds of things, whether it's, tracking things at this granular level that you never even thought of. One that I like, that I was intrigued by when I was introduced to it. And I think it's both a product that's worth looking into, but also just the idea of it is interesting, which is relationship science, or WellSci. That one blew my mind the first time I used it. And for those who don't know, it's basically, let's say you decided that, let's use a terrible example. Bill Gates is your, perfect donor that you want to get to. Everybody wants to get to Bill Gates, right? And it will show you who are the people in between you and Bill Gates. So like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but instead, how do you get to Bill Gates? Well, your board member is cousins with this person, and they used to work together at this place, and you can actually see the path for how to get to that person, which is pretty crazy. But when you think about it, it's not, I mean, the things that are publicly available information, like, oh, these two people went to high school together, or they were both on this other nonprofit board together, that's publicly available information. So it only makes sense that somebody would have figured out how to, capitalize on that data in particular. But I think even just understanding the concept of that, it kind of expands your thinking and your creativity a little bit for how do we if we don't have this particular product, but how do we employ that type of thinking in order to get to somebody who might be that perfect donor, that perfect spokesperson, that somebody you want to come and have as a keynote at your gala, something like that. So I always tend to gravitate toward the relationship side of things. And I think that RELSI is an interesting marriage of both the, potentially the relationship and the data.
Love that. Dan, I'm going to ask you, because I've known your background for a number of years now, and you've gone to like different markets, whether it's New York or Michigan or Pittsburgh and now Dallas. Are you utilizing any of that data to kind of use that social framework from a relationship side? Because you've been having to go to like new markets to restart, if you will.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate early in my career to be in some national roles, and so bounced around a lot of markets throughout the year, 1 week on the East Coast, 1 week on the West Coast. And so, yeah, I mean, making sure using data, using relationship sciences, I couldn't agree more, Jesse, one of the most remarkable tools that I've ever encountered, along with like a WealthX, and I think they actually are now one and the same, which is pretty exciting. But using that to help really understand the landscape that you're walking into, to use that to help the existing people that are already in a place understand the landscape. I mean, how often do we say, hey, we need to get our board or our fundraising committee or development committee to really engage in helping us with donor identification and prospect development? And you go in there and you have that conversation, and it's crickets, right? It's, hey, who do you know? And it's crickets. And it's because there's not a framework. They know a ton of people, and it's hard to get them to focus on 1 or 2 or 3 individuals. But I think using tools like a RELSI or Wealth Engine or any kind of screening tool has been really helpful for me walking into those markets, understanding who the players are, and then being able to guide people that are already connected to the organization to the ultimate goal of introducing me or the organization to a donor or prospect. And so, I think utilizing that kind of data market research is huge. I think, combining that with, we recently did a full kind of evaluation on our database to understand who gave to our very large campaign about 10 years ago, that is unengaged, and then running them through RELSI and other kind of data sets to understand how do we re-engage them, because 10 years is a long time. And, if we haven't maintained those relationships, they are basically brand new prospects. And so using tools and using data to help start that conversation again has been instrumental as we prepare for another large campaign here in the next year or two.
That's awesome. And and I'll just share for the audience, because like we're leaning in on the relationship science, the program there. But to be honest, I'd love to kind of expand on that conversation with our panel of, I think there's much more than that, right? Like we believe that, generosity starts at the volunteer level, right? Like, so a donor becomes a prospect, becomes a volunteer. Like, it's like this small little backwards train, right? So we've got the volunteers with the Boys and Girls Club, that all those individuals are giving, their time and talent and treasure, or even if they're an alumni of a university or just part of our mission, there's much more data out there, the behavior, the buying tendencies, if they're using an Apple versus a Google phone, like beyond the relationship science. Jesse, are you utilizing anything with the volunteer management piece is where I want to lean in on?
Yeah, I think Boys and Girls Clubs is a little different, simply because with the licensure requirements we have, we cannot have armies of volunteers unless they're willing to go through the same process an employee would in terms of clearances and trainings and all of that. We're really big on safety for obviously good reason. But I think for organizations that have an opportunity to bring in a lot of volunteers, there's a lot of really good stuff there, and lots of options for managing those numbers of volunteers, and how do you cultivate them into donors. The kind of tried and true, I think, is that longtime volunteers make great planned giving prospects, as well as potentially monthly donors. And so I think that's a good pool to start with, to kind of dangle that opportunity, because they understand, as everyone knows, if you're a volunteer, you're on the ground, you understand the need enough that you're taking your time to be part of meeting that need. And so I really hate when I hear, don't ask volunteers to give, they're already giving. That's crazy. Definitely ask your volunteers. Those are some of your best prospects for sure. I think they probably think we're crazy if we don't ask them.
Well, and if for the audience, if you haven't attended the after hours session when we kind of wrap up the day and everything else, to Jesse's point, Dave Rayleigh yesterday in our after hours session was talking about the importance of sustaining donors, monthly donors, recurring donors, whatever your organization wants to call, getting in the habit of doing it. But my follow up there is don't forget about the personal touch, right? It's not a bill, it's not a water bill, right? These people are donating it because they're impactful for a mission. So definitely do the stewardship and follow up and be thankful and show that idea of gratitude for those monthly donors.
A lot of institutions, and this is very higher ed kind of centered, but I think it's really coming out into other kind of verticals within fundraising as well, is how you use volunteers to actually drive fundraising revenue. And a big piece of this is giving days. So giving days that you've seen universities that are having these ridiculously successful giving days year over year, and they're growing every year. And the real apparatus, the real pipeline for that growth has been the major expansion of Giving Day volunteers. So utilizing ambassadors, creating pathways and incentives for them to get others to give. So this has been, and some of them do these really exciting programs where it's like a 2 for you. Like if you get 2 people to give, like with your little personalized link, you're going to get a pair of socks or something like that. So they're creating incentive structures to get volunteers to do this really great peer-to-peer fundraising. And particularly for your younger donors, this is like micro volunteering. It's very bite-sized, easy for them to kind of get their hands around without feeling like they're like creating a lot of commitment. Nor are you also committing to having to manage an enormous volunteer corps for the rest of the year. So you've got this like army of people that you like generate great engagement with, but also can kind of like put on the shelf and put for next time as well.
That's great. I love that. Well, and giving days are like huge right now. And that's just like a peer-to-peer campaign for people who don't have working with the university. We have the opportunity to take those ambassadors and be able to grow. I kind of want to pivot 1 second, if I can. I see a comment here from Lauren talking about how they leaned forward, wanted to do a volunteer campaign for humanitarian relief, but then it crashed and burned. I know all 3 of you, talking about the idea about just, testing and learning and growing and where we want to go. And what are your thoughts there about just trying new ideas?
There's so many factors, right? I mean, it could be the ask, it could be the dollar handles, it could be that you sent it in the mail, but it should have been a text. I don't know. I tend to think with this kind of thing, just sort of first blush, I would say that something that meets a really tangible kind of immediate need, like we have this goal for this very specific thing. And if you can give now, we want to meet this goal by today. I mean, something with a little urgency and something that's real. I mean, you mentioned authenticity earlier, Dan, and I won't do it if it's not authentic. I'm not going to pretend that we have some urgent need that we don't have. That's how our whole profession gets a bad name. So I think an authentic, real, tangible need that can reasonably be met, that doesn't seem like a totally impossible pie in the sky kind of goal. That's how I would approach something like that. I don't know if that's what you did. Maybe you did and it didn't work, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump on there as well. I think you're right. Crisis fundraising, I think, really speaks to a group of volunteers that are already committed to the mission. And so certainly we can get them spun up around a specific goal and a specific problem to address, then that's always going to be successful. But I think the other challenge too is volunteers. I come from a background in social service from 2 organizations that are beyond incredibly volunteer heavy, and far too often we would have challenges cultivating them and getting them to make ultimately a gift, whether it was a $5 gift or a $5 million gift. And I think it really is because we almost treated them like employees. We didn't treat them like donors. And I think you have to treat your volunteers like donors at all times, even if they are not one. And so, I think the key is not jumping into, I think, a volunteer giving campaign without putting the work in on the front end. Crisis happens, emergencies happen. Sometimes you have to leverage that. But I think that if you can spend the intentional time in building a cultivation plan around donors that's very specific to them, and that's going to make them feel not only informed, not only part of the team, but really educated around how they can support and give back. I think that's where I've ultimately seen a lot more success come from those efforts.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's culture. And you can't change culture overnight. So I think what jumps out to me there is the word huge. If you're starting from 0 and going to 60 in terms of that campaign, but you don't have a culture where you're soliciting your volunteers, and you do maybe, like to Dan's point, the volunteers are so entrenched they're almost employees. Then yeah, it can be a little jarring, and certainly you're going to get some backlash. But I also don't think that's something that we all as fundraisers have to be comfortable with. That like sometimes you got to rip a Band-Aid off and do the work, because we don't apologize for asking for money. This is what we do. And I think it's something that we, as you're changing culture, it's often something that we have to, take some backlash, expect it, plan for it. We talk about like opt-out rates and unsubscribe and those things, and you got to budget for that in kind of how your year goes, because you're gonna annoy some people. You're going to have some folks that don't agree with what you're doing, but you'll have just as many that do. So I feel like it's worth the risk, and something that we have to continually take. We hear no more often than we hear yes, and we have to be okay with that.
So, and if I could just, Eric, I saw a reply to our conversation here about this, and it was that our main CRM is separate from our database that manages our volunteers, and certainly at a healthcare system that's a challenge as well. We have similar restrictions like Jesse does. We have they have to get blood tested for TB and COVID vaccination, flu vaccine. I mean, all the things that I have to do as an employee, they have to do. And so it's very difficult, very challenging. However, on the flip side, I've worked in organizations where the CRM and the volunteer database are combined. And there's some really amazing products out there that I'm sure any one of us would love to tell you about, but that are, combined and that allow you to really manage the person and not the donor and not the volunteer, right? And so taking that holistic approach to how you manage that relationship through a CRM, I think is a huge part of it as well.
And Lauren, I'm going to share too. I'm going to follow up on that. I'm going to go back to the recordings from RNS, because yesterday I did a session with the Voices of the Front Line fundraisers, and it was with a bunch of human services individuals talking through how do we take that data, like Dan's talking about with the CRM and the technologies, but also how do we break down those individual silos inside our organization to be authentic, to have that culture of philanthropy. You have a program team, you have a volunteer team, you have a fundraising team, you have an operations team. None of them are working together. And, that group like yesterday actually walked through how do we build, to Greta's point, that culture. Team, I see another question in here I'd love to kind of lean in on of, Siri's asking more about leaning forward with just what I'm going to say. I'm going to paraphrase. How do we crawl, walk, run? Like, we want to lean into like texting. We want to go out, go full force marathon running. How do we get the ball rolling to lean in some new ideas and utilizing some technologies?
I mean, I think you got to start today, right? I mean, no matter what it is, you have to start with something. And so pick what that's going to be. If that's going to be, from a comm standpoint, dabbling in automation and email, whether that's going to be text messaging, pick something, double down on it, explore it, but also be not nimble enough to if you fail forward, right? If it doesn't work for you, move forward past that, take that as a learning experience and immediately pivot to something else. But I think far too often, I've worked in old-fashioned shops, I think Siri called it, that are change adverse. So let's just say that in a very nice way. And you've got to try something. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But being able to move forward really quickly after that is, I think, key. But also recognizing that if you have limited resources, do the one that you can afford to do and invest correctly in it, not the one that you can barely afford to do, right? So I think that's really that'd be my takeaway from that.
I think one thing, from earlier in my career, I remember probably, 15, 16 years ago, having to go before the board of directors at the organization where I worked and basically beg for the money to get a new website. One, because the website was terrible, but, the gift processing platform was garbage, and the one thing that we were able to see, we couldn't see all that much data in the website because of the platform that was created on. But what we could see was telling us that potential donors were abandoning the process when they were making a gift because it was just so janky. It was like everything that they tell you that you should not have, weird URLs popping up in the midst of the process, and just being slow, and that thing turning while you're waiting. So those types of things, we knew that we had to get a new website, and it was an investment, certainly. But when we were kind of able to give the rationale for why we wanted to do it and share the results that we expected, and then it happened, then they trusted us. And so it was like we earned this, currency of, hey, we kind of know what we're talking about, and watch it, we'll play out. And what I had promised them was that, the money that came in through the website, that we would, earn that back easily within the first 6 months to a year. And we ended up doing it in a month. And so it played itself out really quickly. I mean, I was really a little surprised at how successful it was. So I'm like, man, that website was really bad. So I think sometimes you have to take a little risk and be pretty confident that you're right, so that then they can see that you're right. And then, whoever you're trying to convince that it's worth the investment, to up your game, that, you kind of have little wins, and then you can go for those bigger ones. And I think it's really important to, even if you're a small operation, you don't have a big budget, you're just 1 or 2 people, just stretch a little bit, just embrace one new thing a year. I think it's so important to do that, because you really do get left behind if you don't stay up to date with this stuff. Because some organizations, the bigger they are, the more robust they are, the more they're investing in people who are experts in these, specific areas under the umbrella of fundraising. And so you have to try to keep up at least a little bit.
I think too, one way to go about this, particularly in an organization where you might not be controlling all the communications, where that's kind of centralized and above, is to chunk it up. Like make it a focus of something specific. So if you have like a Giving Tuesday effort, or a Giving Day, or a specific micro campaign that you're going to do throughout the year, say, we just want texting for this.
Yeah.
Not for everything, not a ubiquitous change to the organization, but we want to use it for this. And this is our test case. This is going to be what helps us start this up. Let's do some A/B testing. We're going to do some solicitation for this particular this event, and that event is going to have, we're going to be doing direct mail and email, and our volunteers are going to be reaching out to people. And one group's going to have that, and the other group's going to have all of that plus text message follow-up. And we're going to see how this impacts our ability to drive revenue. And I think, or to drive attendance, or to drive engagement, whatever the outcome is that you're looking for. I think, to Jesse's point, we need to make things easier for our donors. Like the ease of, we actually do an analysis every year where we look at our clients, and we actually do a little, we call it March Giving Day Madness. Mm-hmm. And we'll go through, and one of our metrics that we're measuring people against is how easy is it to make a gift on your website?
Yep.
Like how many clicks do I have to go through to get to the finish line? And I joke about this all the time, but if I can make a gift without putting my glass of wine down at the end of the day, like if I can sit on my couch with a glass of wine in one hand and my cell phone in the other, and you text me and I get a link and I click on it, and then I can make a gift via PayPal or Venmo, you'll probably get my money, because it's 2 thumb clicks. But if I have to pull out a credit card and then sit and type out my entire life history and demographic information, the likelihood of abandonment goes way up. So I think it's something that, as we can make the case for, again, looking at consumer behavior and how people are making purchases today, that correlates to how people are making gifts. But I think sometimes it's easier for leadership to wrap their head around the addition of a new channel like that if it's very focused on one thing.
Well said.
Well said, all 3 of you. I love, Jesse, what you kind of leading in on was the fact that we have to act like a business. We have to act like a for-profit company doing the ROI and leaning in on all those different things to create that social currency internally. Well, and within the team, we have 2 minutes left. Great conversation. We didn't solve all the world's problems and growing generosity through our data. But with one last parting shot, I'd love to, at least go around the horn and say, I love asking our session panelists of, what's one thing to recommend to these people that are here in our audience to just start and then lean in on moving forward to coming out of RNS. Dan, I'm going to call on you.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I said it earlier, but I think, data and science right now is the future of fundraising. Mm-hmm. And those who don't adopt it are going to get left behind. And so I think you have to be willing to take risk. I think you have to be bold in your risk taking. You have to be prepared to fail. But when you do fail, understand that you're going to learn something and move forward. And so I think the things that we have hopefully discussed today, but in some of the other sessions, I think are really great, responsive ways of looking at how we engage donors in the future. And there's lots of great, I think, data research and resources available out there. It's just a matter of picking one and going down that road.
Yep.
Jesse? I can go. I would say, you don't have to be an expert at everything. Our work entails a lot of different things. And so, I think Greta said at the beginning, like jack of all trades, master of one, I think, or master of none. I think it's like, that's all of us, because it's impossible to be a current expert about everything that we do, right? And so you have to know who are the people that are the experts. And that's where it kind of goes back to what I said initially, is like, don't be afraid of the expo at the conference, because these are people who are experts at things that you don't have time to become an expert at. I think it has to be a relationship built on trust. It's not, a one and done, but build relationships with the people that are selling the newest technology, because that's how you learn. That's how you understand what you actually need. And maybe some of it you don't need, but there's no harm in learning about it, because if you don't, then you will get left behind.
So true.
I think my major takeaway is, especially when it comes to data and to new tech, is a single data point is not a trend. So we have to give things a chance to breathe and give culture a chance to change, and we have to be a bit steadfast with some of the things that we want to try. As much as we might want to like chunk up and try some new things with a particular initiative, it can be really difficult to gauge its effectiveness if you don't give it a chance, and don't give your donors a chance to evolve with you, and don't give everything kind of a chance to breathe a bit. So I think oftentimes it's really about getting commitment from leadership to allow a true test case to run its course, to see it through, whether that's the course of a couple of months or a full fiscal year, whatever it might be. But I think that's the big thing, is to not allow one data point to push you off a course. So I think it can be a cautionary tale as to how data can actually be a bit misleading sometimes.
I love it. Thank you. You guys were fantastic. My Pittsburghers, let's go Buccos. We'll see what we can do with this baseball season. Team, audience, want to share with you as we part ways. Thankful for being here for Responsible Nonprofit Summit. There's more sessions. We've got a session here in 8 minutes. So get a break, go get bathroom, go get some drinks, go come back. One of my favorite people, the group of people are going to be closing us out here at 11. We've got Clay Buck, we got Barbara Riley, we got Lynn Wester, some of the funniest, some of the smartest, some of the most talented people. They're going to take all of what we learned in the last 3 days and lump it into 45 minutes. I don't know how they're going to do it. Clay, I see you in the chat, but good luck, man. See everyone here shortly. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Good job, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
Good luck with